Returning from war with haunted eyes and a heart weighed down by the death of his comrade Drake, Vance had nothing left but alcohol and endless nights of despair. Yet the inheritance his cold father left behind was more than a decaying junk station. It was Luke, a German shepherd, whose unwavering loyalty refused to fade. What once felt like a burden slowly became a guiding light, leading Drake toward a buried secret worth millions and a truth hidden for decades. And then, in the flames of a collapsing bunker, one life-or-death moment changed everything. The dirt road stretched across the Montana outskirts, brittle under the early autumn cold, flanked by fields of withered grass that bent with the wind as fine layers of dust drifted lazily over the uneven path. After years of drifting through war zones and drowning in sleepless nights at the bottom of a bottle, Drake Vance finally returned home, the place he once swore he would never come back to. At the end of the road lay a barren lot, where the junk station stood, silent, decayed, and forgotten for decades. Rusted sheets of tin clung to the roof walls, darkened and rotting with age. The old sign swayed faintly in the wind, its faded letters barely hinting that this had once been a scrapyard. Broken glass littered the windows, stains of rain etched deep into the walls, and from inside leaked the sour blend of oil and mold. Drake stopped an old backpack slung over his shoulders. A cheap bottle clinked inside his coat pocket with every step. His hair was disheveled, his eyes' sunken skin weathered from restless years. The whisper of wind through the gaps of the junk station stirred memories. Him as a boy, standing silently watching a father who bent over piles of scrap metal, cold, unyielding, without a word of affection. Now the only inheritance left was this ruin and an emptiness much larger inside him. He pulled the bottle out, drinking deep. The burn clawed at his throat, flooding his head with the dizzy comfort he knew too well. And each time the image returned. Ryan's steady gaze in that final moment, the scream of bullets ripping through the battlefield. Drake had once promised to bring him home, but that vow had died in the fire pit of war. Since then, he had carried the weight of failure hiding in liquor's haze. Lowering himself onto the warped wooden steps of the junk station, Drake sat with the bottle beside him, eyes wandering up to the gray sky. That was when a sound stirred the silence. Steady, deliberate footsteps across the yard. From the shadows emerged a large frame, Luke, a German shepherd, his amber-brown coat catching the last rays of dusk. His ears stood tall, his amber eyes locked onto Drake with quiet measure. Around his neck hung an old leather collar, the clasp scratched and scarred with years. Drake flinched. He remembered his father once had a dog, but never thought Luke would still be here, guarding an abandoned grave of memories. The shepherd moved closer, claws clicking lightly against the cracked concrete. For a fleeting second, Drake saw something familiar in those eyes. "So he left you for me, huh?" Drake muttered, voice thick and broken. Luke stopped before him. He didn't bark, didn't retreat. He simply sat calm and unwavering, as if to say he had been waiting all along. Drake looked away, tipped back another swallow. He had long abandoned belief in bonds and redemption. Yet when he lowered his gaze, Luke's eyes remained on him. Steady, constant, almost warm. Something in that gaze tugged deep inside a strange sting of comfort. The wind rattled the station's broken door. Inside, the darkness swallowed peeling walls, water stains dripping like wounds that had never healed. Drake pushed the door open hinges, groaning in protest, and stepped inside. The room was wreckage. Sagging shelves, tables blanketed in dust, shards of glass scattered across the floor. This was his inheritance, a place that carried memory more than worth. Luke followed close, silent, yet steadfast, his watchful eyes never leaving the man. There in the ruin, two figures came together. One broken soldier, one loyal dog. Decay and hope, ruin and devotion, colliding in one quiet frame. Drake dropped his pack, slumped into a brittle chair in the corner. He drained the last of his bottle and closed his eyes. Ryan's face flickered again, the last breath of war echoing with the storm outside. Luke stepped closer, resting his muzzle gently against Drake's hand. The touch startled him, pulling his eyes open. In that simple, steady gesture, warm breath against his scarred skin, Drake felt something he hadn't in years, a quiet kind of solace. He didn't pull away. He let his hand stay where it was, the fading daylight painting the ruin in a weary shade of gold. Homecoming began like this. No welcome, no joy. Just Drake, Vance, and Luke, the drifter and the sentinel, standing at the edge of ruin. Yet even in that hollow moment, a fragile spark lit the path toward something unknown. Night fell colder than he remembered. The junk station sank into silence, broken only by the whistle of wind against rusted tin and the drip of water from the leaking roof. Drake leaned back against the rotting wall, empty bottle cast aside. And memories came sharper than any dream. Ryan's smile, his firm grip on Drake's shoulder before the charge. The deafening blast, the smoke, the fall. Drake had sworn to bring him home, yet all that remained was guilt carved deep into his chest. His body jolted awake, drenched in sweat, breath ragged. His trembling hand dug into the pack for another bottle, cracking it open with a hollow snap. He drowned himself in its fire-chasing numbness. A soft sound stirred him. Luke had risen from the corner, amber eyes glowing in the dim light. He stepped closer, silent, but present, his gaze both alert and compassionate. Without a word, he sat beside Drake like a guardian carved out of patience. Drake let out a hoarse laugh, thick with liquor. "You think you can save me, huh?" Luke only tilted his head, ears, pricked eyes steady. For a fleeting heartbeat, it felt like speaking to a comrade who refused to leave. Drake buried his face in calloused hands, whispering to no one but himself. "I left him there. I left Ryan behind." Only the wind answered. Then Luke shifted, pressing his head onto Drake's knee. That simple weight, that warmth, it silenced him. The one relic his father had left behind, the one creature still here, was now the only presence offering peace in the wreckage of his nights. Drake closed his eyes, letting his mind drift back to the days before the war. He had once been a proud soldier uniform, pressed against his chest, carrying the belief that he could do the right thing. But years of blood and fire had strangled those ideals. The man who returned was no longer the same. He was only a fractured body alive, but stripped of his soul. A sudden gust of wind rattled through the broken seams of the junk station, sending a sheet of rusted metal clanging against the wall. Luke sprang to his feet, a low growl rumbling in his chest, his amber eyes fixed on the shadows beyond. Drake followed his gaze, a shiver crawling down his spine. It had been so long since he felt someone watching over him, standing guard. And in that moment, he realized that Luke's quiet presence carried the weight of protection, the kind he once only knew on the battlefield. He slumped down, setting the bottle aside. His hand drifted almost unconsciously to the shepherd's thick, warm fur. A strange sensation stirred in his chest, like a crack in the heavy dark that had swallowed him whole. Drake sighed, whispering hoarsely, "If you're still here, maybe I'm not completely alone." Luke wagged his tail, once silent, but understanding, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. That night, Drake drifted to sleep on the sagging chair, while Luke lay at his feet, eyes fixed on the darkness, like a sentinel. For the first time in months, Drake didn't dream of Ryan falling in fire and smoke. He dreamed of a wide field where a lone soldier sat beside a loyal dog, both gazing quietly at the night sky. Dawn broke with pale light bleeding through shattered glass, scattering across the damp floor in fractured beams. Drake woke with his head pounding, the sour burn of liquor still in his blood. He sat up, surveying the decayed room. The warped walls, crooked shelves, every corner mirroring the state of his own life, bent scarred adrift. Luke had risen earlier, posted at the doorway with ears erect, eyes fixed on the barren yard. At the sound of Drake stirring, he turned and wagged his tail in greeting. That patience startled Drake. The kind of patience from a creature abandoned, yet still faithful, as if no one had ever left him behind. Lighting a cigarette, Drake exhaled into the dim light. Memories thickened with the smoke pulling him back to the man he had tried to forget, Walter Vance, his father. Walter had been a man of iron, with a face hardened into steel. When Drake was a boy, he had never once been lifted in his father's arms, never heard a story, never seen a smile. His childhood was the hammering of steel, the stink of oil and curt commands. Work. Don't ask. Drake had longed for encouragement, for warmth, but only met cold indifference. His father had given more affection to heaps of metal than to his own family. After his mother's early death, that void was filled only with Walter's rigid silence. He remembered one afternoon. He was 13, straining to help lift a heavy steel sheet. His grip slipped, and it crashed to the floor with a deafening clang. His father's eyes cut into him cold with disappointment. If you want to survive, you stand on your own. Don't expect anyone to catch you. The words had seared into him like a blade. It was the first time Drake truly felt alone in his own home. Now sitting in the ruined junk station, the memory stung sharper than ever. Drake let out a bitter laugh. So what did you leave me, old man? A broken shack? And a dog? Luke lifted his head at the sound, his gaze softening as though he understood. Drake looked back at the shepherd, realizing the cruel irony his father had never given him. An embrace but left him Luke, an animal capable of offering warmth in ways Walter never had. Rising, Drake rummaged through an old cabinet. Inside were wooden boxes, moldy papers, rusted scraps. In one corner he found a battered tin box with a broken lock. Among stacks of faded receipts lay a leather notebook, its edges frayed. Opening it, he recognized his father's rough handwriting. If someone is reading this, I'm gone. The junk station is not just scrap. It holds things that cannot be left outside. I know I was never the father I should have been. But you must understand, there are truths larger than love. Drake narrowed his eyes, rereading the lines. What truths, what secrets he had never believed Walter was anything beyond a junk dealer. Yet the words dripped with something hidden, something that had weighed on the man all his life. Closing the book, Drake felt a knot in his chest. He remembered his father's eyes in those last days as sickness hollowed his body. Still rigid, still refusing weakness. And now through these words he had left behind fragments of a life shadowed by secrets. Luke nudged the tin box with his nose eyes, insistent. Drake stroked the shepherd's head, murmuring, "Maybe. You left me more than I thought." Another memory surfaced. On the day he enlisted, his father had spoken only once. "If you go, you make sure you come back. Don't make me bury another." It had sounded harsh then, but now it rang like prophecy. Walter had indeed left something behind. Not love, but a burden Drake had yet to unravel. He sat in silence, cigarette smoke curling into the morning light. The past had been unearthed, exposing pain entwined with mystery. Looking down at Luke, he whispered, "Maybe I need to find out what the hell he hid in all this scrap, boy." Luke wagged his tail, eyes steady. In that moment, Drake understood. Though his father had taken silence to the grave, he had left him a companion, one willing to walk with him into the darkest corners of memory. Outside, the wind picked up dust, spiraling in the air. The old junk station sign creaked, groaning against its rusted chains. Above, the sky darkened, as if foretelling storms ahead. By afternoon, Montana's chill had settled deeper, cloaking the junk station in a heavier stillness. The wind whistled through every crack, carrying a metallic rattle across the yard. Drake pulled open the screeching iron door, stepping into the storage lot, where his father had spent a lifetime stacking silent fragments of steel. Dim light filtered through the high window, tracing lines across rusted beams and forgotten machine parts. It was a world of chaos where gears, chains, and steel frames lay scattered like relics, abandoned by time. To Drake, this place had once been the hell of his childhood, where he was forced to hold a hammer instead of books, to obey harsh orders instead of hearing words of encouragement. But today, with his father's worn notebook tucked in his jacket, he looked at the piles of steel differently, almost as if something had been hidden within their cold weight all along. Luke padded behind him, nose twitching as he sniffed the air. His ears were high, his body taut with tension. Drake frowned, noticing the shepherd seemed to be reading the room with senses sharper than his own. He pushed through a row of shelves, knocking scraps of metal to the ground. The clattering echoed through the warehouse until behind coils of rusted springs and pipes, he uncovered an old wooden crate sealed with nails. Faint markings were still visible on its surface. With a crowbar, he pried it open, only to find scraps of steel and a few gears no bigger than his palm. Drake let out a dry laugh. "Still junk, huh, old man? Even dead, you're still haunting me." But Luke wasn't watching the crate. His eyes were fixed on the far corner of the floor. He pressed his nose close to the concrete, then barked once, sharp and echoing. Drake froze. He crouched down, scanning the floor. The cement there was stained a different color, with a jagged crack running across it. "This spot," he muttered. Grabbing a sledgehammer from the corner, he brought it down hard. The floor shattered, dust rising in a choking cloud. Beneath the broken surface was a square iron hatch with rusted hinges. Drake's heart kicked against his chest. A hidden cellar. A passage his father had never spoken of. With a grunt, he pulled it open. Cold air rushed upward like the breath of something long sealed away. A spiral iron staircase vanished into the dark. Luke stood close for bristling, caught between caution and resolve. Tightening his grip on the hammer, Drake began the descent, each step echoing like knocks from the earth itself. The sight at the bottom stopped him cold. In the thin beam of his flashlight stretched a concrete chamber walls, solid and square. Wooden crates, iron chests, and leather-bound files filled the space. On a steel desk rested an old typewriter, maps layered with dust and folders stamped with faded insignia. Drake's hands trembled. This was no junkyard. This was a vault. A hidden archive his father had buried for decades. He opened a file and saw the yellowed emblem of a Cold War intelligence agency, pages thick with codes and classified notes. A sheet slipped loose, scrawled by hand. "If you're reading this, you've found it. Beware. Your own family." Drake froze his breath, caught. His father's cryptic notebook, the hints in his writing. Suddenly they aligned into something chilling. This wasn't just about state secrets or old war ghosts. It pointed toward Olivia and Marcus, his own sister and brother. Luke growled softly, eyes fixed on the stairwell. Drake looked up, pulse hammering. Was someone out there? Or only the wind? He hurried up the stairs, slammed the hatch shut, and sank to the floor, sweat chilling his skin. In that moment he understood. The junk station was no longer just a heap of rust and ruin. It was the heart of a dark inheritance, one his father had forced into his hands. Clenching his fists, Drake met Luke's amber eyes glowing steady in the fading light. "Looks like Luke. We've just dug up a nightmare." Luke wagged his tail, once moving closer, ready to walk into any shadow alongside him. Outside, the Montana wind howled, sweeping dust into the air. Inside, in the silence of rust and steel, the pieces of a buried secret had awakened. And with them, a storm was about to break loose. That evening, the junk station sat under a blanket of cold gray. Moonlight streamed through shattered panes, painting the rusted walls in a mournful glow. Drake sat hunched on a creaking chair, his father's notebook open beside a wrinkled map, its torn edges yellowed with time. The map bore strange markings: arrows, tiny squares, and a single red circle drawn directly over the junk station. Drake narrowed his eyes. He had always known this place as a dumping ground of steel, but his father had marked it as something far more. Luke lay at his side, head resting on his paws, eyes locked on every move. Drake inhaled deeply, whispering to himself, "All right, Luke. Let's see what else the old man buried beneath this concrete." With his flashlight in hand, he walked to the center of the warehouse. The beam fell across the cracked floor, its fissures branching like veins across the old cement. Luke followed, sniffing intently, until he stopped and began clawing at the ground. Dust billowed upward as his paws scraped at the fractures. Drake stared, surprised. For years he thought he was the one leading, but now it was clear. The dog was guiding him. "You found something, boy?" he asked, voice low. Luke growled softly, digging harder until a corner of rusted iron peeked through. Drake knelt, brushing the dust away. His pulse surged. A hidden hatch. He jammed the crowbar into the seam. The hinges screamed as if protesting after decades of silence. Beneath the crumbling cement, a square iron door revealed itself, locked with a corroded clasp. He struck it hard, the lock snapping with a sharp clang. The hatch gave way. A rush of icy air spilled upward, laced with mold and rust, like the breath of something long imprisoned. A spiral staircase dropped into darkness. Drake shone his light, the beam swallowed before it reached the bottom. He looked at Luke. The dog's ears, high body taut, yet his gaze unwavering. "This time you lead," Drake said softly. His tone carried something unfamiliar. A respect for the shepherd, no longer just as a companion, but as a guide. They descended together, their footsteps pounding against thick concrete walls. The deeper they went, the heavier the silence grew, pressing in until it seemed the earth itself wanted to devour them. At last, they reached a steel door. Its paint long stripped its surface, scarred by time. A faint outline of handprints lingered there, proof that someone had once stood in this same place. Drake pressed his palm against the cold metal. A chill cut through him. Whispering under his breath, he asked the darkness, "Father, what were you hiding here?" Beside him, Luke sat, watchful, amber eyes gleaming. And in that moment, Drake realized, without Luke, he would never have come this far. The shepherd was more than inheritance. He was the living compass, pulling him into the heart of his father's secrets. He drew a long breath and set his hand on the handle. The steel door groaned. With every inch it gave heavy, as if it carried the weight of decades. Damp air rushed outward in a sudden wave, like a giant secret awakening from its sleep. The beam of his flashlight cut through the dark, revealing shelves of files cloaked in dust. Sealed iron crates and a world map pinned against the wall. Its surface dotted with dozens of red markings scattered across Europe and Asia. Drake stood frozen, heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat, his hand trembling. He turned toward Luke and whispered softly, "I think this journey is only just beginning, boy." Luke's tail swayed, his amber eyes glowing like embers, ready to follow him into whatever secrets waited beyond. Outside, the Montana wind whistled through the cracks in the roof, carrying the groan of rusted sheets. Inside, beneath the cement floor, the door now stood open, placing Drake and Luke on the threshold of a truth buried for a lifetime. A truth that could change everything. The steel door swung wider, releasing a pungent blend of iron dust mold and time itself. Drake inhaled sharply, his chest tightening with a mix of dread and anticipation. The small flashlight carved only a narrow strip of light through the room, grazing concrete walls and rows of filing cabinets that loomed like silent sentinels. He stepped down the iron staircase, each footfall echoing heavily, the metal vibrating under his weight. Luke descended alongside Muscle's taut ears, pricked his breath quick and steady in the dense air. The shepherd's amber coat shimmered under the thin beam, a flicker of flame in the darkness. At the bottom, Drake halted. Before him stretched a vast chamber tall as a warehouse. Old wires snaked along the ceiling, some dangling, clinking faintly when the wind seeped through cracks. In the far corner, a line of dusty black and white monitors stood like relics of a forgotten command post, their glass fractured yet still reflecting faint glimmers of light. Drake swung his beam leftward. Rows of iron cabinets stood in tight ranks, each drawer labeled with faded names: Berlin, Prague, Hanoi, Moscow. A chill coursed through him. This was no scrap heap. It was a counterintelligence bunker buried beneath the junk station he had once dismissed as nothing but rust and ruin. Luke prowled the floor, nose-sweeping claws scraping lightly at the concrete, as if catching traces unseen. His amber gaze sharpened, fur bristling along his back. Drake approached a large safe pressed against the wall. Its seams were sealed with metal welds, scraps of paper bearing security emblems from the 1960s still clinging to its surface. He laid a hand against it. The cold seeped straight into his skin. His pulse hammered. "Father, what in God's name did you leave me?" he whispered. On a dust-covered table nearby sat a rusted typewriter and stacks of files bound in leather straps. He pulled one free, coughing as dust rose like smoke. Opening the first page, he found dense reports. Communication charts, names, coded notes. Many were unfamiliar, but scribbled handwriting made his blood run cold. Marcus, Connection, and Olivia. Surveillance. Drake sank into the chair, his hands trembling. His own sister and brother, watched, perhaps entangled in this hidden network his father had carried to the grave. The red circles on the map, the coded notebooks. It all began to knot into one tangled picture with his family at its center. Luke stepped closer, tapping a claw against the floor as if urging him to stay steady. Drake lifted his eyes, meeting the dog's unwavering amber gaze. In that instant, amidst the weight of dusty files and iron secrets, Luke became the only living anchor keeping him from drowning in guilt and memory. He struck a match and lit an old oil lamp he had found in the corner. A dim golden glow spread across the concrete walls, waking the chamber from decades of darkness. The shelves loomed clearer. The maps revealed more symbols, lines, circles, and among them, a mark near Montana. Drake's chest tightened. Why was Montana on this web of surveillance? Could his hometown itself have been nothing more than a cover for something larger? He turned back to the safe, eyes narrowing. Behind its welded door lay more than reports, perhaps original lists, evidence, even fragments tied to Ryan's death. Drake pressed his calloused hands against the cold metal. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of a choice. Stay buried in drink, or step fully into the storm his father had left behind. Luke stood vigilant at his side, ears flicking at every sound from the corroded pipes. Each faint creak drew a low growl from his chest. Drake rested his hand on the shepherd's head and murmured, "If someone's watching, we need to be ready." The bunker's air was thick, heavy with dust, suspended like memories clawing their way out of the past. Drake knew then. This was no longer about a crumbling junk station or an old notebook. This was espionage, a game of survival. And he, along with Luke, had just stepped onto the board. He slipped one file into his coat rows and looked toward the stairwell. Above, Montana's surface lived in peace as always. But down here, a hidden world of betrayal and secrets had opened beneath his feet. Drake stroked Luke's head, exhaling slowly. "You've led me this far, Luke. From here on, there's no turning back." Luke wagged his tail, his amber eyes shining like an oath. Outside, Montana's night deepened in cold winds. Inside, the counterintelligence bunker glowed under the faint lamp. marking the beginning of a journey Drake had never imagined, a journey into the truth and into the heart of his own family. Drake sat motionless at the wooden table, the old files splayed before him. The oil lamp's glow stained the yellowed pages in gold, as if history itself were rising from the grave. The scent of mold and paper seeped into his lungs, sending a shiver through him, as though the entire bunker breathed with the weight of its past. He opened a file marked Berlin, 1963. Typewritten lines described surveillance operations, infiltration plans, coded pseudonyms. Each page turned was a door into a parallel world. Men in suits, pistols hidden in pockets, speaking in codes on cold European streets. The images triggered memories of his father's clipped stories, half told and abandoned. Now Drake knew. They had never been myths, but shadows of a network that had lived hidden right beneath Montana's soil. Luke sat close, ears still high, occasionally licking Drake's hand as if to anchor him in the present, keeping him from drowning in the heavy past written across the yellowed pages. Drake pressed on, eyes scanning quickly through reports marked Prague 1968, Hanoi 1972, Moscow 1979. Each one told of bloody missions, agents abandoned to preserve secrets, accidents masking executions. His heart began to pound, sweat breaking across his forehead, despite the bunker's icy air. Then he opened a file with no label and froze. The very first page was a scrap of handwriting, hurried and uneven. Ryan. Target for elimination. The name stabbed into him like a blade. His hands shook as he turned the page. The report was incomplete, many sheets torn away. What remained spoke of an operation in the Middle East. An ambush his own unit had endured. The notes whispered of an internal leak, possible connection to the Montana project. Ryan may have discovered it. Drake's breath hitched, his eyes locked on the words. A chill ripped through his spine. He remembered that day. Ryan cut down while covering the squad. For years, Drake had carried the guilt, believing he hadn't moved fast enough to save him. But now, the ink on these pages twisted that wound into something worse. Maybe Ryan hadn't fallen by chance. Maybe he had been marked. He leaned back hard in the chair, eyes squeezed shut. The room spun, walls closing in, the files whispering like a chorus of ghosts. Target for elimination. Internal leak. Every phrase carved deeper into him. Luke barked once, low and steady, snapping him back. Drake opened his eyes to meet the shepherd's unwavering amber gaze. And in that gaze he found a silent command. Face it, don't run. Drake turned back to the table, this time reading slowly, piecing the fragments together. The report cut off at the critical point. Who had given the order? Who had signed Ryan's fate? His mind reeled with a thought too sharp to hold. Could it have been his father or another branch of the family? The bunker, the files, his father's silence. It all traced back to a shadow none of them had dared name. He rose, pacing the wide chamber, fingers brushing the great map on the wall where red marks dotted capital after capital. His eyes stopped on one circle over Montana, beside a scrawl in hurried pen, safe house. V. The letters shook uneven. Was it a code name, or did V stand for Vance? Drake's jaw tightened as his gaze returned to the sealed safe. Every nerve in him screamed that the answers about Ryan, about Olivia and Marcus, about his father, were locked inside. But cracking it would take time, maybe even outside help from someone who knew how to break encrypted locks. He folded the half-torn file and tucked it into his coat. From this moment forward, life could never return to what it had been. Ryan's death had haunted him for years. But now the truth had begun to surface, dragging him forward. Not just for Ryan's sake, but for his own. Bending down, he rested a hand on Luke's head, his voice rough. You see it, don't you, boy? Ryan may have been killed. And we're going to find out who did it. Luke's tail flicked once, his eyes steady, a silent vow in the dim light. The bunker fell quiet again, only their breathing filling the cold air, a broken man trying to rise, and a loyal dog ready to walk into the dark with him. Outside, the Montana wind howled through the junk station's cracked roof. But beneath the ground, Drake had ripped open an old wound, exposing a truth that could shatter everything he believed about his comrade, his father, his family. He left the bunker in a haze of turmoil. The old files, the torn reports, Ryan's name. They clung to him like shadows. As the steel door clanged shut behind him, he lifted his gaze to the Montana sky, heavy and darkening. The Highland wind cut through the junk station's rusted beams, sharp as a knife. Luke padded at his side, his amber coat shivering in the gusts, his eyes sweeping the shadows. Drake had just started toward the main room, ready to collapse with a bottle, when a faint sound scraped across the gravel outside. Instantly, his soldier's instincts flared. He raised a hand for silence. Luke crouched low, ears, rigid eyes fixed on the gate. From the line of trees, a tall figure emerged, cloaked in gray. As she stepped closer, the crescent moon revealed a sharp face and cold eyes. She stopped a few paces from him, voice firm. "Drake Vance. We need to talk." Drake stiffened, hand tightening around the flashlight like a weapon. His eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" The woman reached into her coat and held up an ID card under the moonlight. "Special Agent Harper, Department of Intelligence Security." Her voice was steady, though edged with fatigue. "I've been tracking you since the moment you set foot back in Montana. And once you entered the junk station, I knew this meeting was inevitable." Drake's gut clenched, an invisible rope tightening around his chest. He glanced at Luke. The shepherd growled low, stepping forward, a living shield between him and the stranger. Harper didn't flinch. She regarded the dog with an unnerving calm, then spoke. "We believe this station holds secrets that once threatened national security during the Cold War. And there are those who may still try to wake them." Drake let out a dry, bitter laugh. "National security? What I found down there were counterintelligence files, and a name I know too well, Ryan. Don't tell me you came here to bury that truth, too." For the first time, Harper's eyes faltered, though her composure snapped back quickly. "I'm not here to deny or to erase. I'm here to make sure that if anything remains, it doesn't fall into the wrong hands." Drake stared at her in silence, blood boiling with suspicion, yet aware of the scale of the machine he was standing against. He could not fool himself into believing the government would help him find justice for Ryan. But he also knew, standing alone head-on would crush both him and Luke. "What do you want from me?" His voice came out rough, frayed. Harper stepped closer, weariness etched into her features. "Cooperation. Share what you've uncovered. In return, we'll keep you alive. Drake, you're a soldier. You know what it means to be hunted. And you know that if certain people out there learn about this bunker, you and your dog won't stand a chance." Luke growled low, his gaze locked on Harper. Drake bent to stroke the shepherd's head, then lifted his eyes to the agent. In the dim light, his stare was a deep well of anger and suspicion. "I don't trust you, but I don't want anyone else reaching their hands into this. So for now, I'll listen," Drake said slowly, each word dropping heavy as lead. Harper nodded, showing no triumph, only stern gravity. "Enough to begin. I'll provide you with what we know. In return, you'll share what you found inside that bunker." Drake was silent, eyes drifting back toward the junk station, as if weighing every choice. At last he turned. "Fine. But remember this, if I catch you hiding the truth, or trying to lead me in circles, I'll find my own way." Harper's lips curved into a smile without warmth, the kind born of a fragile pact forged in cold wind. The Montana gusts swept through the vacant yard, rattling the loose sheets of metal. Overhead black clouds churned. Inside the abandoned junk station, an uneasy alliance had just formed. Fragile as rusted wire, yet strong enough to pull both of them deeper into the storm of buried secrets. Luke never dropped his guard eyes fixed on Harper. And Drake, though his chest swirled with anger and doubt, felt a faint and dangerous spark. Perhaps Harper's arrival meant he was closer to Ryan's truth. The late autumn wind lashed across the plains as Drake steered his battered pickup toward the wooden house on the hillside, where Olivia and Marcus had lived all these years. Luke sat in the passenger seat, amber eyes shining through the glass, reflecting his master's tension. Drake had hesitated for days before this drive. Since their father's death, the distance between him and his siblings had widened into a fracture too deep to mend. But the files in the bunker and Ryan's name inked in shadows had forced him to seek answers directly from Olivia and Marcus. When the truck stopped at the entrance, Olivia was already there. Arms crossed, her face still graceful, yet lined with weariness. Behind her, the wooden door creaked open just enough to reveal Marcus. Tall, broad-shouldered, half waiting, half retreating. "Drake." Olivia's voice was soft, breaking. "You really came back?" Drake gave a slight nod, his eyes brushing over the gray in her hair before fixing on Marcus, whose sharp features masked eyes that wouldn't meet his. "We need to talk," Drake rasped. "About father, about the junk station, and about Ryan." A silence fell heavy. Olivia's lips pressed tight, her gaze wavering, while Marcus gripped the doorframe so hard his knuckles blanched. Finally, Olivia stepped aside, opening the door. "Come in. We'll talk." The cabin smelled faintly of coffee, warmer than the storm outside. Drake sat in an old wooden chair, Luke at his feet, ears sharp as if ready for anything. Olivia poured him a cup, her hand trembling slightly as she set it down. "Father left more than we thought," Drake began, eyes sweeping over both of them. "A hidden bunker, classified files, unfinished reports. Ryan's name is in them." Olivia lowered her head, hiding her eyes. Marcus exhaled hard, tapping his fingers against the table. Drake recognized the tells, habits he had learned to read in the field. Marcus was concealing something. "Who do you think we are in all this, Drake?" Marcus' sneered voice edged and bitter. "Just children of a man who lived in shadows. You found files. So what? Nothing changes." Drake narrowed his eyes. Marcus's words were a wall, but unease bled through the cracks. He leaned forward. "How do you know I found files I never gave details?" The room stilled. Olivia's hand clutched her cup tighter. Marcus faltered for a split second before snapping, "I just guessed." Drake's mouth twisted into a bitter smile. "Guessed? Right down to the details. You're hiding something, Marcus. Did you know how Ryan really died?" The air thickened. Olivia hurried to place a hand on Drake's shoulder, her voice trembling. "Enough, Drake. You've just come home. Don't turn this into a fight." He glanced at his sister, saw in her eyes a sorrow laced with fear. She wanted to stay away from the pit, but she couldn't deny its pull. Marcus rose and walked to the window, his large frame silhouetted against the falling dusk. He drew in a long breath and let it out. "If you've uncovered it, then let it rest. Ryan is gone. Digging it up will only make things worse." Drake shot to his feet, eyes blazing. "You say that like you know something. Ryan didn't fall to a stray bullet." "I have the right to know the truth." Luke rose too, a growl rumbling low in his chest, mirroring his master's fury. Olivia rushed between her brothers, her voice breaking. "Please, both of you. Drake, you don't know everything. Marcus, neither do you." The cabin fell into silence, but for the ticking of the wall clock. Drake's fists clenched, his gaze burning into Marcus's back. His brother stood rigid, shoulders trembling, carrying a burden too heavy to confess. Drake knew this was only the beginning. Their reunion was nothing but a thin veneer stretched over tension, suspicion, and secrets. And with every glance he grew more certain Marcus was hiding something tied directly to Ryan's death. And the junk station's shadow. Outside, dusk swallowed the cabin. The wind moaned through the cracks, a reminder that truth still lay locked, waiting to burst open. That night, Montana drowned in silence, wind sweeping over the junk station's rusted roof. Drake sat alone in the underground chamber, the yellow lamplight sharpening his gaunt face. The clash with Marcus still echoed inside him, like an open wound. He knew he couldn't depend on half answers or evasive eyes. The truth lived here. In dusty stacks of files, in sealed safes and traces time had failed to erase. Luke lay at his side, ears-high amber eyes glowing steady in the lamp's glow. The shepherd was his shadow, refusing to leave, sensing the storm within. Drake dragged a heavy steel crate from the corner, a cloud of dust bursting free. The lock was corroded, but with one sharp pull of the crowbar, it gave way. Inside lay bundles of aged files, mold-stained tapes, and a stack of photographs bound in a yellowed envelope. His hands trembled as he opened the envelope. Under the lamp's glow, black and white photographs slid out one by one. There was Ryan, his comrade captured in uniform. Yet the backdrop was not any battlefield Drake recognized. Instead, it was a dim room, faces gathered in shadow, soldiers, officers, and strangers Drake had never seen before. But what froze his blood was a detail in the corner of one photo, blurred yet unmistakable. Marcus, his own brother in a civilian coat, standing at the edge of the frame, his gaze fixed on Ryan. Drake's breath quickened, the photograph crumpling in his grip. Marcus had lied. He hadn't simply guessed about the files. He had been there. Part of the same hidden operation Ryan was tied to. "Marcus," Drake whispered, voice raw. Luke suddenly rose, circling the crate before stopping at a plastic sleeve wedged deep inside. Sniffing furiously, the shepherd growled, low hackles bristling. Drake's pulse surged. He pulled the folder free. The moment he opened it, a metallic stench struck his nose. The smell of dried blood fused with the must of old paper. His chest tightened. Inside were stained pages, blotches of dark brown scattered like scars. He turned the sheets, his hands unsteady. The words were fragmented, an incomplete Cold War mission report. In the center, Ryan's name was underlined, tied to notes about an inside contact and a local informant in the neutral zone. At the bottom corner, scrawled in ink, were two letters, MV. Drake froze. The initials crashed into him like a hammer blow. Marcus Vance. Air thickened in the bunker, pressing in until he could barely breathe. The fragments were aligning now, but into a picture too cruel to face. Marcus had been directly entangled in that secret mission. And Ryan's death. Maybe it hadn't been chance at all. Luke kept growling, his amber eyes fixed on the blood-stained folder, as if warning his master that this was the heart of the danger. Drake stroked Luke's head, whispering hoarsely, "You're right. This reeks of blood and of lies." He collapsed back into the chair, the photo of Ryan and Marcus clenched in one hand, the stained file in the other. Memories surged. The day Ryan fell, the shock in his eyes, the scream tearing from Drake's throat as he pulled his friend into his arms. For years he had blamed himself. But now everything grew darker, more twisted. Marcus, his own brother, could be the missing piece. Above, the wind rattled the junk station iron sheets, clanging in the night. Drake gripped the file tighter, his eyes burning in the lamplight. The truth was here within his hands, but it cut deeper than any wound. A truth layered with betrayal, blood, and peril. Luke lay at his feet, though his gaze never left the file, his breath, sharp ears still taut. In those loyal eyes, Drake saw his own realization. From this moment, they were bound to a path with no return. A road leading straight into the blood-stained truth that could destroy the Vance family. Night sank over Montana's street lamps flickering against the empty roads. Drake drove through the dark mind consumed by the images. The photos of Ryan, the stained file, the initials MV. Luke sat silent in the passenger seat, ears pricked, carrying the same weight that pressed against his master's chest. Olivia's cabin glowed with light. When Drake knocked, his sister appeared, hair disheveled, eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. She faltered when she saw him, then stepped aside to let him in. The living room was warm from the fire, but tension coiled thick in the air. Drake dropped the envelope and the bloodied file onto the table, the sound sharp in the silence. His gaze cut into Olivia. "Explain this," he rasped. "Why is Marcus in these photographs? Why is his name in the reports?" Olivia's hands clenched at her clothes, her eyes skimming the pictures before turning away. For a moment she said nothing. Then, with a broken breath, she whispered, "You shouldn't dig this deep, Drake. Some truths are better left buried." Drake's fist slammed against the table, making Luke bark low. His eyes blazed. "Ryan is dead. He fell right in front of me, and now I see Marcus tied to something rotten. How long were you planning to stay silent?" Tears welled in Olivia's eyes as she shook her head, voice breaking. "Fine. You have the right to know. But listen first." She sat across from him, trembling hands brushing the file. Every word cut at Drake like a knife. Marcus, he was part of a weapons ring back then. Father, he was the one who dragged him into it. The junk station wasn't just scrap metal. It was a hub. Ryan. He found out too much. Drake's world spun, the room shrinking. He clenched his fists, rage flooding his veins. At last, the truth he had craved stood before him. But it was unbearable. "You're saying Ryan died because of Marcus?" His voice cracked. Olivia shook her head fiercely, eyes red. "I don't know what truly happened that night, only that Ryan confronted Marcus about a shipment. After that, he never came back." Luke stepped forward, pressing his nose to Drake's hand, urging him to breathe. But the storm inside him raged. Anger, grief, betrayal colliding all at once. His eyes burned into Olivia. "You knew, and you said nothing." Olivia broke down, sobbing. "You think it was easy I had to hold this family together? Protect Mother, protect you. If the truth came out, it would bury us all. Marcus, Father, every Vance name. Don't you see?" Drake turned away, hands clutching his head, his breath ragged. The battlefield memories, Ryan's dying eyes, the years numbed by alcohol. All of it came roaring back. He loved his family, but Ryan's voice, Ryan's loyalty screamed louder inside him. "So what do you want me to do?" His voice was gravel. "Stay silent. Pretend I never saw this." Olivia lowered her head onto the table, her trembling hand grasping his. "I beg you, Drake. Stay quiet. If you stir the past, it will consume us." The room hushed, save for the crack of firewood in the stove and Drake's heavy breathing. Luke stood by his side, amber eyes, unwavering, as if to deliver the unspoken message, "Stand firm." Drake looked at Olivia, the tears streaming endlessly down her face. He felt the bond tying him to his family being pulled so tight it was on the verge of snapping. On one side lay the unfulfilled promise he had made to Ryan, on the other ran blood, flesh, and kinship. In that instant, Drake felt himself standing between two paths, one leading to truth, but also to collapse. The other leading to a fragile peace, but at the cost of betraying the memory of a fallen brother in arms. Luke nudged his nose against Drake's hand, amber eyes steady and unyielding. Drake understood that no matter which choice he made, this dog would follow him, through both light and shadow. He lifted his head, looking at Olivia, his voice slow but resolute. "I need time, but you must be ready to face it." Because this bond has already begun to break. Outside the window, the wind hissed through the trees, carrying with it the last of the autumn leaves. Darkness pressed in, but in Drake's eyes, a flame of resolve had begun to burn. That Montana night sky was pitch black, not a single star. Drake sat in the bunker, the dim light of a single lamp casting his and Luke's shadows long across the cracked cement floor. In front of him lay a blood-stained file and the photographs that had driven Olivia to tears. Questions hammered his mind. What had Marcus really done? And how had Ryan died because of it? The phone buzzed softly on the table. Harper. Drake hesitated for a breath, then answered. I think you found something. Harper's voice came calm but cold. I have information too. We need to meet. A long sigh escaped Drake's chest. He knew the moment could no longer be delayed. The meeting took place in a near-empty bar on the outskirts of town. Harper sat in a shadowed corner, a glass of whiskey untouched before him, as though it were only there to serve as cover. Drake entered Luke close by his side, the dog's eyes scanning the room. Ears raised, body tense and ready to react. Harper studied Luke, giving a slight nod. I see why you keep him near. Sometimes a dog is more loyal than any blood relative. Drake pulled out a chair, voice hoarse. Talk. What was Marcus involved in? Harper slid a thin folder across the table. The papers bore security logos with blurred satellite images and copies of weapon contracts. Marcus wasn't dealing in small arms. He was a key link in an international network. Heavy weapons, millions of dollars, shipments passing through multiple countries, and Junk Station was one of their transit points. Drake flipped through the pages, his knuckles turning white around the paper. Harper continued, voice even, but sharp. Ryan uncovered it. He tried to report, but the file was blocked. We believe Ryan's death wasn't a battlefield accident. It was a warning, or a deliberate elimination. A stabbing pain tore through Drake's chest. He closed his eyes, replaying the moment Ryan had fallen, blood soaking into the dust of the battlefield. The guilt he had carried for years, now sharpened by a horrifying truth: Ryan had died because he knew too much. Luke rested his head on Drake's leg, amber eyes glowing in the dim light as though reminding his master to hold steady. Are you certain? Drake's voice cracked, each word forced through his throat. Harper met his gaze unblinking. I don't deal in theories. This is confirmation. Marcus Vance betrayed both his comrades and his country for money. It was a knife driven straight into the heart. Drake turned away, unwilling to let Harper see his eyes brimmed with tears. His family, the Vance bloodline, had sunk into darkness. A cold father, a greedy brother, and Olivia choosing silence to preserve a crumbling facade. Drake shot to his feet, his chair screeching across the floor. Luke immediately rose too, body taut with tension. I'll uncover everything myself. Drake's voice was steel. And if Marcus is guilty, I will not spare him. Harper gave a slight nod, gathering the papers. Good. But remember this, Drake. When you dig deeper, you're not just facing Marcus. The network is still alive. You'll be striking a hornet's nest. And when that happens, Luke may be the only shield you have left. Drake gave no reply. He walked out into the night, the cold air biting his face. But beside him, Luke moved with unwavering stride, every motion radiating resolve. On the road back to Junk Station, Drake's blood roared in his veins. Brotherhood, Ryan's promise, his own honor, all torn apart. Yet one thing was certain: the past would hide no longer. The truth about Marcus, about the Vance family, would be unearthed, no matter the cost. Luke brushed his hand gently, eyes glowing brighter in the dark. Drake bent down, forcing a bitter smile. You feel it too, don't you? The storm is coming, and we'll face it together. In the distance, Junk Station emerged under pale moonlight, a dark silhouette waiting. Drake knew there was no turning back. He had stepped into the spiral of blood betrayal and truth. That night, the road home was eerily silent. Wind whistled through dead trees, moonlight streaking faint paths across the asphalt like ghostly lines guiding the way. Drake drove the old pickup, fingers clenched tight around the wheel, while Luke sat upright on the passenger's seat, head lifted, ears erect, every muscle taut with vigilance. Since leaving the bar, an ill omen had clung to Drake, and now it pressed heavier than ever. As the truck rounded a narrow bend, the headlights swept across a strange glint on the road. Metal. Drake frowned, and before he could react, two vans burst out, blocking the way. Tires screeched, engines roared, and armed men spilled out. "Down!" Drake shouted, slamming the brakes, the truck jerking violently. Gunfire, cracked glass, exploded shards spraying through the cab. Drake ducked, dragging Luke to the floor. His heart pounded, the acrid stench of gunpowder filling his nose, hurling him back into war-zone memories. But this was no battlefield far from home. This was his own road, where he had once hoped to find peace. A man in a black coat advanced, gun raised. Before he could fire, Luke leapt through the shattered window, launching like a living spear. A snarl tore through the night, followed by a body slamming hard to the ground, a strangled scream cut short. Drake seized the moment, rolling out of the cab, snatching a length of iron from the roadside. Two more assailants opened fire, sparks flaring in the night. Drake dove into the brush, gasping, ears ringing with the rattle of bullets. A quick glance back, Luke locked in combat, with a man fur streaked with blood, but eyes blazing with fierce defiance. "Luke!" Drake roared. The dog delivered a final crushing strike, toppling the man, then bolted back toward his master. Drake swung the iron bar, smashing the weapon from another attacker's grip. The blow staggered him, and Luke crashed into him seconds later. Teeth clamped down, screams of agony tore into the night air, echoing along the lonely road. Drake seized the moment to wrench the weapon away and pressed it against the last man's temple. His eyes burned red, his breath ragged. "Who sent you?" he demanded. The man groaned, blood spilling from the corner of his mouth. He gave no answer, only a mocking grin, defiance flickering in his eyes. Then a long whistle echoed from afar, the retreat signal. Engines roared, trucks rumbled to life, and the attackers dragged their wounded away, vanishing into the night, leaving behind only gun smoke and the acrid sting of powder in the air. Drake stood frozen, the gun trembling in his grip. Luke pressed close to his side chest. Heaving fur matted with blood, yet his amber eyes burned steady. Drake bent down, wrapping his arms around the dog's neck, his voice cracked and hoarse. "You saved me." In his embrace, Luke growled low, a warning that danger still lingered. Drake lifted his gaze to the darkened road. The town of Montana, once thought quiet and untouched, had just revealed itself as a hidden battlefield. These men were no local thugs. Their weapons, their formation, the precision of their ambush. It was all too organized. And their target was him. Blood pounded in his temples, his chest ached with each breath. Harper's words echoed in his mind. When you dig deeper, you stir the hive. Ryan had died for that truth, and now Drake understood. It was his turn to face those desperate to bury it. He tightened his grip on the gun, staring into the darkness where the convoy had vanished. In that moment, Drake knew there was no turning back. He had stepped into a war. And in that war, his only true ally was Luke, the dog who had thrown himself into gunfire to keep him alive. The wind cut through the trees, carrying the scent of blood and smoke, etching the warning deeper into his mind. Every step from here on would be written in blood. Yet Drake felt no fear. He laid a hand on Luke's shoulder and whispered, firm and resolute, "From now on, we're not just searching for the truth. We're fighting to survive." In the cold moonlight, Luke's amber eyes glimmered like a loyal flame, promising to follow him into the darkest corners. News reached Drake only days later. In the underground chamber of Junk Station, he sat across from Harper, papers scattered across the table like fragments of a broken past. Luke lay at his side, head resting on his paws, eyes locked on Harper with instinctive vigilance, as if sensing this was a moment that would shape everything. Harper slid a thick folder across the table, his voice low. "This is everything we've gathered. Marcus is preparing for the largest weapons deal we've ever seen. The shipment leaves Montana this weekend. If it succeeds, the weapons will fall into the hands of an international syndicate already hunted worldwide." Drake's hands clenched until his knuckles cracked. The thought of Marcus, the brother who once guided him as a child, orchestrating such darkness, clawed at his chest, but the files spoke a truth that could not be denied. Harper paused, watching Drake carefully before continuing. "Worse still, Olivia's name is on the list." Drake's head snapped up, his eyes darkening. Olivia. The sister who once held him close when their father raged. Harper slid a photo across the table. In it, Olivia stepped out of an abandoned warehouse beside Marcus and a foreign man. Her eyes were cold, her expression steeled. The tenderness Drake remembered was gone. The air seemed to collapse around him. "They've chosen this path," Harper said firmly. "If we don't stop them, thousands of innocent lives will pay the price." Drake rose, pacing the small chamber. Memories collided. Ryan's sacrifice, his father's shadow, Olivia's embrace, Marcus's betrayal. Luke pushed up from the floor, brushing against his leg, ears high, awaiting his command. At last, Drake turned back, his voice raw but steady. "What's the plan?" Harper nodded, spreading a map across the table. His finger traced red lines through the wilderness. "The shipment will stage here near the Canadian border, then move by armored trucks. Marcus runs coordination, Olivia handles paperwork. We must intercept before they leave Montana." Drake's eyes locked on the map. At the web's center sat Marcus, his own blood. "I'll go," he said. "Not only for Ryan, but for this family. If Olivia still has a way back, I'll be the one to reach her." Harper hesitated, then spoke gravely. "You need to understand. Once the deal begins, there's no room for sentiment. Olivia has crossed the line. If she stands against you, you must be ready." Drake gave no answer, but the fire in his eyes said enough. Deep inside, he still clung to hope, the hope of pulling her back from the abyss Marcus had created. The silence was heavy. The flicker of the old lamp ticked like a countdown. Luke raised his head, amber gaze blazing, and let out a low growl. Drake's hand found the thick fur at his neck, steadying himself on the dog's heartbeat. "Where do we strike?" Harper pointed to a narrow crossing on the map. "Here, an old bridge over the river. The convoy has no other route. With the right setup, we can stop them. But we'll need more time, and more men." Drake shook his head. "We don't have time. I'll go with you. If I face Marcus, I'll be the one to speak." Harper studied him long, then nodded. "So be it. But remember, Drake, once you step in, there's no way back." Drake turned to Luke, who stared back with unwavering loyalty eyes, like mirrors of his soul. He gave a single nod. "We're ready." Outside, the night wind howled through the rusted seams of Junk Station. All of Montana seemed to hold its breath. A deadly deal was coming, and Drake knew this time would decide everything. Blood ties, betrayal, and the final weight of loyalty. The Montana night was thick with fog, wind sighing through the mountains like a mournful breath. Drake drove his battered pickup down the dirt road toward the abandoned warehouses where Marcus had called him. On the passenger seat, Luke sat upright, ears erect, amber eyes scanning the darkness beyond the glass, every muscle taut with instinct. Drake's grip on the wheel tightened. Marcus's message still burned in his mind. Just a few words. Meet me. The old place, alone. It could be a trap. It almost certainly was. But if he refused, Marcus would only sink deeper into the dark. A small part of Drake still believed against all reason that somewhere inside his brother's heart, blood still mattered. The truck skidded to a stop before the massive steel doors, rust-stained, pocked with old bullet marks from wars long past. Drake climbed out, flashlight in hand. Its beam swept across the ground, catching the grooves of fresh tire tracks. This place wasn't abandoned, no matter how it looked. Luke leapt down beside him, muscles taut, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Let's go, old friend," Drake whispered. The steel door groaned open, its hinges screaming with age. Beyond lay a cavernous underground chamber, black as pitch. Concrete walls cracked with time, dangling wires swayed from the ceiling, dripping water echoed in the distance. The air was damp, acrid with mold, and the tang of burned metal drying Drake's throat. He stepped inside. Luke's shadow pressed close behind him. The beam of light seemed swallowed whole by the dark. Then from deep within a voice rasped out, "Drake, at last you came." Marcus emerged from the shadows, his long coat dusted with ash, his eyes cold as forged steel. For an instant, Drake glimpsed the brother who once taught him to shoot, who shielded him from their father's wrath. But that image dissolved, replaced by the man the darkness had consumed. Marcus Drake's voice cracked. "Stop this before it's too late." Marcus's mouth twisted into something like a smile, but there was no warmth in it. "Too late, little brother. Our past, everything Father left us. It has to stay buried." A flicker, then harsh neon light snapped on overhead, revealing the nightmare etched into the chamber. Explosives, dozens of them. Boxes wired tight, red lights blinking like 100 watchful eyes. Drake's blood turned to ice. "God," he breathed. Marcus's gaze flashed with something raw, pain, regret, then hardened again. "This is the only way. The files, the evidence, anyone who dares unearth the past. All of it ends here." Drake stepped forward, fire breaking through his voice. "Even me? You'd kill your own brother?" Marcus didn't answer. The click of a switch echoed like a gunshot. The timer engaged. The red lights blinked faster. Luke roared a thunderous growl and launched himself at Marcus. "Luke, no," Drake shouted. But it was too late. A smaller charge detonated, flames ripping from a corner of the chamber. Fire surged into crates, climbing higher, devouring wood and steel alike. The bunker became hell. Drake lunged forward, but concrete cracked overhead. A slab of ceiling crashed down, hurling him to the floor. His head snapped against the ground, stars bursting in his vision. Dust blinded him, smoke scorched his lungs. Through the chaos, he heard Marcus's voice, strained, echoing. "Drake, go. Don't look for me again." Then the fire swallowed his brother's shadow. Drake staggered to his feet, dragging Luke through falling debris. Explosions thundered in succession, each wave of heat hammering his chest. Flames snapped at their heels. The exit loomed ahead, but it was blocked by rubble-twisted steel choking the doorway. Sweat streamed down his face. Smoke clawed into his chest. Luke barked furiously, slamming into broken beams, paws scraping sparks from the concrete floor. "Push! Luke, push!" Drake coughed, seizing a jagged bar and heaving against a concrete block. The timer's red blink burned into his vision. Death ticked closer with every pulse. With a final roar, Drake shoved the slab aside. Luke squeezed through the gap, then snapped back jaws, clamping Drake's sleeve, pulling with desperate strength. The roof groaned, split, then came crashing down in a storm of fire and stone. With the last of his strength, Drake hurled himself and Luke through the breach, collapsing onto cold, wet earth. Behind them, the chamber erupted. Fire belched from the doorway, a blast that shook the ground and flung both man and dog across the dirt. Shards of steel rained like knives. Drake hit hard, air ripped from his lungs, ears ringing with nothing but static. When his vision steadied, Luke lay on the ground nearby, panting, fur singed, but his amber eyes still blazing. Alive. Drake wrapped his arms around the dog's neck, voice breaking. "We're still here. You saved me again." Behind them, the bunker collapsed inward, entombing everything. The files, the truth, Marcus himself. Drake stared into the inferno, grief clawing through him. Had Marcus betrayed him? Or was this his last desperate way of shielding his brother from the abyss? The fire raged like a beast unchained, devouring every corner of the old chamber. Concrete split open cracks, snaking like veins across the walls. Smoke thickened, blistering heat seared his skin with every breath. Drake tried to stand, but his legs buckled, body trembling from the blast. A thunderous crash split the air as another slab of ceiling collapsed. He went down hard, choking on dust. Luke lunged again. Despite scorched fur and bleeding paws, the dog clamped his jaws into Drake's coat, dragging him across the scalding floor. Sparks skittered from his claws as he hauled his master inch by inch toward the only way out. Through the haze, Drake caught a vision. Ryan's face grinning before their last mission, then pale and empty as he fell. Tears burned through soot on Drake's cheeks. His voice was barely a rasp. "Ryan, I won't fail again." Luke heaved one final time, and together they tumbled clear as the corridor collapsed behind them. Fire roared up a wall of crimson, sealing off the path forever. They crashed into the dirt, coughing, broken, but alive. Drake gasped for breath, chest tearing with each inhale. His hand found Luke's back, muscles taut, heart thundering but steady. And there amidst the chaos, Drake understood his survival was no longer just his own. It was a vow to Ryan, to the truth still buried, and to the loyalty of the dog who refused to leave his side. With trembling arms, he braced himself on a twisted steel bar, forcing his battered frame upright. Smoke clawed at his lungs, but his voice came rough, unyielding. "We're not dying here, Luke. We live to fight." Luke answered with a sharp, resonant bark, the sound cutting through the storm like a battle cry. His ears stood tall, his eyes blazed, and he stepped ahead into the haze, guiding Drake forward, unbroken. Two silhouettes and a dog, one bent with pain, the other unyielding, pushed through the blazing inferno. Behind them, explosions roared, the underground bunker convulsing, as if it meant to swallow every memory and every buried truth whole. Drake clenched his jaw, each step weighted, but more resolute than ever. His mind no longer echoed with grief or shame, only a blazing determination. He would not perish in the dark. He would live, uncover the truth, and claim justice for Ryan. Their figures disappeared into the smoke, leaving behind a collapsing sea of fire. The Montana wind whistled across the wasteland where the bunker once stood. Ash and twisted steel lay scattered like relics of a war that only survivors could understand. Drake stood there, his clothes scorched, skin raw. Yet his eyes burned with a startling clarity. At his side, Luke limped heavily, his front paw dragging faintly from the shard wound, but his ears stayed erect, his amber gaze a flame that had never dimmed. From afar, Harper's SUV appeared, dust trailing behind. The old man stepped out, his face heavy as he looked upon the wreckage. In his hands was a thick folder and a charred hard drive, its data partially salvaged. "You're alive," Harper muttered, his weary eyes betraying rare surprise. "I thought both of you had gone under." Drake nodded faintly, his hand pressed to Luke's back as if to prove the miracle that stood beside him. "We don't break that easily." He seized the folder, flipping through its pages. Red seals, faded signatures, weapon schematics, lists of shadowy deals, all of it pointing to one name, Marcus Vance. Between them were unfinished reports mentioning Ryan Drake's fallen comrade, a link deliberately cut out. Drake's fists clenched until his nails drew blood. He lifted his eyes to Harper. Enough. I've been running too long. It's time to face him. Harper's gravelly voice came steady but grim. I thought the same. But you know what this means. Once you step forward, there's no way back. Marcus isn't just a gun runner. He's a chain in an international network. And Olivia, she's not merely complicit. She's the keeper of the key. A cold gust carried the stench of ash. Drake turned to the snow-veiled mountains on the horizon, then down to Luke. The dog panted, hard-bodied, trembling, yet his eyes locked onto him, burning with the vow, I will walk with you, no matter what lies ahead. Drake lowered his forehead to Luke's, their breaths mingling, heartbeats thudding in unison. A silent pact forged in fire. You've saved me more times than I can count. Now it's my turn. We'll finish this, Luke. He straightened his voice like steel as he faced Harper. We're going straight to their den, Marcus and Olivia. No more shadows. Harper studied him for a long moment before sighing, a weary smile tugging at his lips. Then we move like soldiers. Step by step. No hesitation. Drake stuffed the files into his pack, tightening the straps across his shoulders. He led Luke to the battered pickup, holding the door as the dog climbed in with slow but stubborn strength, eyes still fixed forward. When the engine roared alive, the dying sun spilled crimson across the dry fields, painting the sky in blood-stained hues. Drake's hands locked around the wheel, his silent vow echoing inside his chest. He would live like a soldier, and this time no life would be wasted in vain. The rough road stretched ahead, leading straight into the heart of darkness, where Marcus and Olivia waited. The abandoned sawmill loomed at Montana's edge, swallowed by endless pines. Once alive with the screech of saw blades and resin's pungent bite, it now stood hollow rusted beams, pockmarked tin roofing, and a yard blanketed in hardened sawdust, as cold as the ashes of a forgotten age. Drake and Harper entered their footsteps, echoing eerily. Luke limped close to his master's ears, sharp eyes alert, every muscle taut. Silence hung so thick that only the wind's hiss through the cracks in the walls could be heard, a dirge in steel and wood. Suddenly a floodlight snapped on from the upper platform. Marcus stepped into its glare, a smile carved in malice shadow clinging to his face. Beside him stood Olivia, arms crossed, gaze unreadable and colder than ever. Welcome to your farewell party, Drake, Marcus growled, venom lacing each word. It's been a long time coming, hasn't it? Drake's eyes narrowed, hand tightening on his weapon. Harper shifted, ready for the storm. Then a gut-wrenching sound ripped through, the strangled growl of Luke. The iron gate behind them slammed shut. From the shadows, armed men dragged Luke down, chains binding him tight. Marcus laughed darkly, boots grinding sawdust as he descended. I know how much this mutt means to you, he sneered. So let's see your choice: save him or avenge Ryan. Marcus, leave the dog out of your filth, Harper roared. Marcus only chuckled, signaling his man. A gun pressed to Luke's temple. The shepherd stood firm, amber eyes ablaze despite his trembling legs. Drake's soul split in two. Before him, vengeance against the betrayer who had drowned his world in blood. Beside him, Luke's life, the loyal soul who had dragged him out of the abyss, who had bled to keep him alive. Ryan's voice whispered through the storm of his thoughts. Drake, life isn't for revenge. Life is for protecting what's worth keeping. Drake's chest heaved, sweat stinging his eyes, but resolve ignited. Slowly, he lowered his gun, voice hoarse, but unwavering. I choose Luke. Marcus faltered, his cruel smile slipping. In that flicker of hesitation, Harper lunged gunfire, cracking sawdust and splinters erupting. Drake rolled muzzle flashing. Luke seized the chance, wrenching free, slamming his captor down, teeth snapping through steel and bone until the rifle shattered. The chains tore loose, clattering like thunder. Chaos engulfed the sawmill. Marcus roared, firing at Drake, but Luke hurled himself forward, taking the bullet across his back. Blood sprayed red, soaking the pale sawdust. Marcus Drake's cry ripped through the air, his eyes blazing. He fired, driving Marcus back, but instead of delivering the kill, he dropped to cradle Luke against his chest. No more deaths. No more lives lost to your hate. Marcus froze, fury warring with disbelief. Harper's gun stayed fixed on Olivia and the scattered men. The battlefield's silence trembled, waiting for the next move. The sawmill flared with fire flames erupting from a punctured chemical drum as smoke rolled upward and the crackling wood snapped like war drums. In the chaos, Drake held Luke tightly, whispering to the blood-soaked German shepherd, whose amber eyes still shone with trust. "We're not finished yet." The acrid scent of burning timber mixed with the chemical haze, each crackle of fire striking against Drake's memories like a hammer blow. Kneeling, he wrapped his arms around Luke. The dog's once warm coat was matted with blood. Yet those unwavering eyes glowed with a faith that refused to break. Marcus staggered back, the gun trembling in his hand. He couldn't fathom it. Drake lowering his weapon, choosing to save the dog instead of ending the fight. To Marcus, it was weakness. But in Luke's eyes and in Drake's heart, it was the last remaining strength to resist the darkness. "You really let the chance to kill me go," Marcus snarled, masking his unease. Drake laid Luke gently on the ground and rose, the firelight catching in his gaze. "I didn't let it go, Marcus. I just refused to drown in hate. Ryan died because of your betrayal, but I won't let death consume what's left. I choose life." Olivia flinched at the words, her face trembling, stripped of its cold facade. She stumbled back, but Harper seized her, locking her arms tight. "Enough. Olivia, you can speak in court." Drake's eyes met hers, no longer burning with anger, only weariness and sorrow. He knew she had chosen Marcus's side, and now she would face the weight of it. Harper bound her in cold steel cuffs and pulled her away. Marcus roared, his eyes blazing, as his sister was dragged off. "Olivia!" He lifted his gun, ready to strike, but Drake's voice thundered over the fire. "Drop it, Marcus! It's over!" "Over," Marcus laughed bitterly, chest heaving. "No, Drake. It ends only when one of us lies dead." But the rising wail of sirens cut through the smoke, red and blue lights piercing the cracks of the crumbling sawmill walls. Reinforcements were closing in. Marcus froze, the trap closing around him. In desperation, he swung the gun toward Drake, only for Luke, bleeding and staggering, to surge forward once more, a bark erupting like a battle cry. Startled, Marcus fired wide, the bullet splintering a support beam in a cloud of sawdust. Drake seized the instant, tackling Marcus hard to the ground. They grappled in the smoke and grit, Drake's grip forcing the weapon from his brother's hand. "Let go! Marcus!" Drake bellowed, his voice rumbling like thunder. "Your scheme has collapsed," Marcus thrashed, but fear flickered through his eyes. The files, the witnesses, even Olivia, all had slipped beyond his control. He was a shadow with nowhere left to run. Drake stepped back, chest heaving. He didn't deliver the killing blow Marcus had long feared. His voice was low, steady. "I'm not a murderer. I'm a soldier, and I choose life." Marcus sagged, hatred mixing with despair in his gaze. As the police boots pounded through the sawmill, he realized his road had ended. Outside, Montana's sky was the color of ash, yet dawn's pale light was breaking over the ridges. Harper led Olivia to the cruisers, while Drake lifted Luke into his arms, blood soaking his sleeve. "You chose right," Harper said softly, respect glinting in his eyes. Sometimes the real victory isn't in who falls, but in who still chooses to live. Drake pressed Luke close, whispering to the fading but resolute dog. The road ahead is long, Luke. But from today, we no longer walk in the dark. Behind them, Marcus was hauled away and Chain's fury etched into his face, but powerless to change the truth, the empire he built had crumbled to ashes, leaving only the raw edge of reality. The Montana sky opened wide, crystalline clouds, streaked like brushstrokes across an endless canvas. The wind carried the scent of earth after rain, clean and alive. At the town's edge stood Junk Station, once rusting walls and shadows of ruin now reborn. Fresh tiles gleamed on the roof, white paint brightened the scarred walls and windows, reflected the afternoon sun. A wooden sign welcomed all Luke's Promise Community Center. It was more than a name. It was a vow, a scar healed, a path back to light. Inside, veterans gathered in circles of chairs, sharing memories that once chained them in silence. In another corner, children chased rubber balls, their laughter echoing like wind chimes. The walls bore photographs, ruin rebuilding rebirth, telling a story of transformation. Drake Vance walked slowly through it, boots heavy, but spirit lighter than ever. Every smile, every glance was a balm against scars he still carried. Beside him, Luke strode, tall amber coat catching the light, his old wound now just a faint scar, an eternal proof of loyalty. Sir, the kids want to meet Luke, a boy called Eyes Shining. Drake bent down with a nod. Luke lowered his head, letting the boy's hand rest gently on his brow. The shepherd stood, calm, breath steady, surrounded by children's laughter, as if they were touching a living legend. Harper, now retired, stood at the doorway, his gaze softer than it had ever been. A cup of coffee rested in his hand as he looked at Drake with a quiet pride. "You've turned this place into something no one could have imagined, Drake," he said, his voice warm and steady. "I once thought you'd walk away from it all. But look at it now. Junk Station has become a home for so many." Drake smiled. "It wasn't me, Harper. It was Luke. Without him, I would have had no reason to rise again." As if understanding, Luke lifted his head, amber eyes fixed on his companion. In that moment, Drake bent down, his rough hand resting gently on the shepherd's head. A simple gesture, yet it carried the weight of two souls who had once fallen, now standing again side by side. That afternoon, the launch of the Luke's Promise Foundation was held in the station's main hall. Drake stood on the wooden platform, scanning the faces of veterans seated before him. Some wore dark glasses, hiding the fragility behind their eyes, while others clenched their hands, still caught in the grip of memories. Drake drew in a deep breath, his voice steady yet resolute. "I once drowned in darkness. I thought my life would end at the bottom of a bottle. But then a friend pulled me back. Not with words, not with force, but with silent presence and unyielding loyalty." His gaze shifted to Luke, lying faithfully below the stage, ears raised high. "This foundation exists so that anyone burdened by the scars of war, anyone battling ghosts of loneliness and despair, can find a reason to keep living. Luke gave me that reason. And now I want Luke's promise to be that reason for every one of you." Applause rose, filling the hall with a wave of hope. Harper nodded, his eyes glistening. Among the rows of hardened faces, a few smiles began to break through, fragile but real. As the sun sank low, Montana fields bathed in gold. The once abandoned Junk Station now pulsed with laughter and renewal. Drake settled onto a wooden bench by the porch, leaning back into the breeze, his hand resting on Luke's head. The shepherd lay close, amber eyes reflecting the glow of the fading sun. In that stillness, everything seemed to dissolve. The wreckage of the past, the nights drowned in alcohol, the blood-soaked battles. All that remained was light warmth and the steady weight of a faithful friend's head. A smile spread across Drake's face. Not a forced one, not weighed down with sorrow, but the true smile of a man who had finally found himself again after a long road of loss. And there, in the place once defined by rust and ruin, now stood a symbol of rebirth, of loyalty, and of a bond no time could break. The last rays of sunlight bathed two silhouettes, a man and his German shepherd, side by side at Junk Station, like a promise that would never fade. In their steps, one could see a simple, profound truth. Sometimes it is a four-legged friend who becomes the only bridge leading us out of the dark. What began in a wrecked junk station, piled high with scraps of metal, ended in a community center, alive with hope. And that transformation was born not only from the hands of a broken veteran, but from the loyal gaze and steady heart of a German shepherd. German shepherds, renowned for their intelligence, courage, and devotion, once again proved their worth beyond service or protection. Luke's steadfast presence beside Drake was more than loyalty. It was a reminder that love, whether from human or animal, has the power to heal. The message of their story is not only for veterans or those who have known loss. It is for all of us, that in a world of turmoil, kindness, gratitude, and unconditional friendship remain our anchor. Sometimes a gentle touch, a quiet glance, or silent companionship is enough to rekindle faith in a weary heart. When Junk Station was reborn as Luke's promise, it was not only the revival of a place, but the rebirth of hope itself. And perhaps within the ordinary rhythms of life, each of us also has a Luke, a loyal friend, a small act of love, or a quiet reminder that there will always be a reason to walk toward the light.